There is more to the inflation story than the mainstream narrative is telling. Let me explain. While addressing inflation, Yahoo Finance interviews Rakeen Mabood, and I'm watching this interview and having so many thoughts. I went ahead and I took portions of it and I've clipped it together. I just want to start and I'll be interjecting while this plays. Here we go.
Well, inflation continues to be in focus from Wall Street to Main Street to Washington. The producer price index soaring nearly 20% or 10% in January from a year ago. And our next guest recently testified on Capitol Hill on pricing and the root cause of the price spikes. Let's bring in Rakeen Mabood. She's a chief economist at Groundwork, and we should mention Groundwork is an economic policy think tank based in DC.
This introduction does not do her justice. I went ahead and looked her up. Here we go. PhD, first thing you should notice. She does work for the Groundwork Collaborative. She's an expert on economic inequality in the 21st century workplace with a particular focus on how structural factors such as racism and sexism perpetuate inequalities. She's very well known, very well published. I do want to point out though that she served in the Obama administration in the Office of the Economic Policy at the US Department of the Treasury, right? She has a PhD in government from Harvard and a Bachelor of Arts in Economics and Political Science.
You know, my organization, the Groundwork Collaborative, has combed through hundreds and hundreds of earnings calls. What we see is across sectors, across companies, CEOs are just crowing about how they can raise prices on consumers, all while bringing in record profits. And that's really the root of a lot of the price increases that we've been seeing.
And here Yahoo Finance pulls up the PPI index. And what this does essentially is track changes to the cost of production. And this is kind of a counter argument to what she's saying, so it's kind of room to pull it up, I thought. Now, the CPI is different. This is the typical inflation that you're used to seeing. This is the cost going up of things you buy. So here I have the PPI pulled up. You can see the final demand is about 9.7. And there's some other things too about food being around 13 and finished consumer goods, less foods and energy being at around 7. If you need to pause, go ahead and pause because I'm going to compare it to this set of numbers. This is the CPI data and this all comes from good sources. It'll be in the link. You can see all items at 7.5, all items less food and energy is at 6, and services less energy service is 4. So essentially the PPI is going up faster than CPI.
There's a good amount of research that shows that wages and prices are not linked right now. So the sectors where we're seeing the highest price increases are not the sectors where wages are actually going up. So wages don't seem to be a driver at all with the current price increases. You know, Tyson, which is one of the 4 big meat packers, identified by the Biden administration as an industry where there is actually a lot of price gouging. Tyson's poultry prices, they've risen them about 20%. Their beef prices, they've risen about 30%, and they've seen profits nearly double.
So I went ahead and looked at the PPI here for meats and processed poultry, and you can see it's about 25%. So to have the cost go up to produce 25% and the prices make sense. The question is, how are companies making increased profit margins as PPI rises faster than CPI and also manages their labor costs? This is the big question.
We have seen, you know, my organization, Groundwork Collaborative, partner with the American Prospect to dig deep into the supply chain. And what we found is 50 years of deregulation, financialization, and rampant corporate concentration that basically created a bunch of mega companies and turned our supply chains over to those same mega companies. What they did with that power, they built this incredibly brittle supply chain. So that means that, you know, if one link in that supply chain breaks, the whole system breaks down and prices go up, or we see supply bottlenecks, which we've been hearing about. But a really brittle supply chain, that just-in-time supply chain, also allows them to boost short-term profits. So they've built a system that works for them, but not for anyone else. And at the end of the day, these companies are using those bottlenecks, those supply shortages, those very real price increases, but adding just a little bit on top to pad those profit margins. And addressing the situation we're seeing now is really going to take a lot of tools across the toolbox.
So what is it that the mainstream media is leaving out of the inflation narrative? It's that large companies are passing the cost of production onto the consumer at a premium and at the same time consolidating power, which ultimately takes away the consumer's ability to search for cheaper prices. There is a reduction of competition in the economy, and I believe that The pandemic has exacerbated this. That's what I think is not being stressed enough, that the consumer is being squeezed, and this hurts the least wealthy and the most underprivileged among us, and it is not okay. We have to fix this. And I think as consumers, we're going to have to step up and say something. And it starts with consumer choices. It's difficult. You've got to go to the supermarket, right? Sometimes you just got to go on Amazon to get what you need, and that's a problem. So, inflation is what? The product of mega corporations holding the American consumer hostage.